We need automation that actually feels human. The real unlock is knowing which buyer signals actually matter.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the HubSpot Hints podcast. I'm your host, Andy Brimhall, and we have my co-host, Mike Thatcher, who is also the CTO of Hintable. Mike, welcome to the show.
Good to be here as always.
We were having an interesting conversation the other day because, as you well know, I'm not super technical, but I started messing around with Replit. I started kind of vibe coding, and it was kind of the first time in a long time that I've really kind of been blown away by what AI can do. I think everybody's been using it, daily. They've been using it kind of like as a, consultant, as a writer. They've kind of used it for a lot of these sort of simple use cases that we're all familiar with. But when you get into the world of coding and vibe coding, it's really impressive where it's at and how quickly you can kind of whip up ideas. But it has some limitations, and we were kind of chatting about that the other day. What are your thoughts on vibe coding as a whole, Mike?
I think it's awesome, the things that it enables non-developers to do, right? Absolutely amazing. It's incredibly good at a lot of things, right? And not just non-developers, like developers can use it all over the place. And it's amazing what you can accomplish and how quickly you can code something that used to take you forever. There are pros and cons with it, but I'm excited for the future to see where it goes, right? Because right now, it's certainly not perfect, right? But you can do so much with it. It's such a powerful tool, just like anything, right? If it's a tool and you recognize it as a tool and you use it right, then you can create magic. But if you try to do everything with that one tool, sometimes your end result ends up a little bit lackluster.
Right. And that's kind of been my experience too, with at least Replit. Just trying things out. It seems really, really great at sort of prototyping and designing an idea, something that maybe in the past you would have kind of, built a diagram for, and then maybe you started, moving some stuff around in Figma to kind of try to represent, like, here's what I'm thinking, and it's something that you can show somebody. But it's really great at doing that super quick. And it's clickable. You can press buttons, you can kind of move through a flow of something and kind of see how it works and make little adjustments by just prompting it. But then my experience is once I get to a certain point where it's like, okay, now I need to start connecting the APIs, and now I need to start kind of bringing in all these other things to make it work. That's when you kind of hit a little bit of a technical barrier, which is where someone like you would then come in and need to actually make it work, actually make it scalable, deployable, right?
Yeah. And that's a good way to look at it, is kind of once you hit something really technical, it's really good to have a really technical person. If you hire like a dev intern or whatever, right? Someone who's going through college, has maybe coded a bunch in their spare time in high school or something like that. They can do and accomplish a lot of things, but they don't necessarily know all of the infrastructure side of things or the best practices or all that. Now, AI should know those things, but a lot of what AI is trained on is Q&A, which doesn't take the holistic picture. It's more of someone had this question, how to do this. And so it's like, well, here's the answer. And if I were to give that answer online, it would just be like, yeah, I'm going to tell you how to do this. I'm not going to waste all this time saying and you got to keep in mind the security vulnerabilities of this. If you copy and paste this, you need to do this, this, and this. And vibe coding or AI coding in general doesn't always take that into account unless you explicitly tell it to. But even that, right, unless you have some sort of background there, you don't really think oh, you know what I ought to tell it? I ought to tell it to consider this security vulnerability, because most people don't think about that unless they've spent a lot of time with programming security stuff, right? So really, really good for those basics that you'd essentially have a really good developer intern doing. But then beyond that, it requires a lot of handholding, just like that developer intern would, right? Now, it can do it better than developer intern in most cases, but it still isn't going to make all of the assumptions about what to do. But again, I think it will get better. And I think they'll train these models to be smarter when it comes to things like security. But in the meantime, you're absolutely right. You can mock something up incredibly well. And if it's not actually touching a database, it can give you some mock data and really make it feel like a working prototype. Now, it's certainly capable of setting up those databases and things like that. But again, that takes a little bit more manual pushing.
Quick shout out to our sponsor, Hintable. If you're using HubSpot and it still feels a little robotic, Hintable helps fix that. Hintable lets you add interactive video directly into your HubSpot workflows. So instead of generic follow-ups, your contacts hear from a real human with buttons, branching, and intent signals synced back to HubSpot. So think of it as a way to humanize HubSpot without breaking your existing workflows. If you want to see what that looks like, check out hintable.com. If we just step back a little bit, like when it comes to HubSpot, there are so many interesting things that an agency owner or a fractional CMO or, a marketing agency, there's so many interesting tools that they could potentially build very quickly through vibe coding for a particular customer that has a very specific need. I was talking to an agency owner the other day, and they are vibe coding a bunch of tools, not only for their internal use to help manage the team and do it specifically the way they want to do it, but they're also working on tools to deploy for their customers that tie into HubSpot. And I just think that's like an interesting phenomenon that this kind of unlocks, is the ability for teams that maybe aren't heavily focused on dev, but have a little bit of those capabilities. Now with vibe coding, it unlocks the ability to we have this really interesting customer over here and we love them and we've built some cool stuff for them in HubSpot, but they're in a weird industry or they have a weird particular need. Actually, we could just whip something up for them real quick and it could solve a problem that they have. And so this agency owner that I talked to the other day, he was walking me through how he's doing that exact same thing right now, which is I'm just going to build something custom for them. And what does that do? As an agency owner, that adds a little bit of stickiness to your service, right? It's going to be that much harder for them to churn, because not only will you lose you as their marketer or their HubSpot service provider, you'd potentially lose this tool that they've been accustomed to using. So I just think it's an awesome unlock that agencies could look into.
Right. And the cool thing about it too is you can have your sales guy mock this up, right? And then run it past your dev and say, hey, is what I mocked up actually doable? And the dev can then say yeah, change this and that and the other, and you're good to go. But that didn't take hardly any of the dev's time. But the sales guy who knows exactly what the customer needs is able to come up essentially with a spec that the customer is able to say yeah, that's what I want, close that deal. And then the dev just has to work on the back end and a little bit of wiring. And then HubSpot has some really good tools when it comes to their AI development, or using AI to develop with their APIs and everything. And so you enable that and suddenly you can do a lot of that project, if not all of it, in vibe coding, which is awesome. And that's one of the things that vibe coding is really good at. It's creating something from nothing, right? Where you start really slowing down with vibe coding is once it's built something and you're okay, now change this, or now add this feature, or now do this, that, and the other. It's not nearly as good at that. But if you stay okay, I've got a fresh company, this is exactly what I need from them. This is the data I need from HubSpot. This is, da, 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 da. It's okay, boom. And it spits out at least the UI for it in Replic's case. And you can show it to the customer and they'll be yes, that's exactly what I need. Or, you know what, it'd be cool if it could do this thing. And then again, you can vibe code that and make it feel like it's doing that, and then have your developer do that. Or in some cases, actually vibe code that functionality in.
Right. Yeah. And you touched on something really important there, which is HubSpot is built in a way that it almost invites you, or it almost wants you to build things on top of it. There's so many cool things that you can do once you tap into their APIs. Just to give an example of the way that you used to solve these types of problems for your customers in the past was by plugging in a bunch of third-party solutions that weren't exactly what they need, but it was maybe the closest thing available. And so what that ends up doing is you're either misusing or underutilizing some other tool that's expensive in order to just do this one tiny thing. So the gentleman that I was talking to the other day that's building this platform for his internal team and for his clients, it was kind of an interesting, almost stripped down version of Asana, right? Where you're doing task management. But what he wanted to do, because he has just a very simple workflow with his clients where they have sort of a weekly meeting where they'll touch base, talk about projects. but his team is only, his marketing team is only doing some of them, right? And then the company's team is doing some of the projects themselves, right? Because they kind of have some split skill sets there. So all he needed is, I just need a platform that is able to ingest our meeting notes, automatically generate tasks from the meeting, and then easily assign my team, your team. That's all he needs, right? And yeah, there's tools out there where you could kind of like make that work, but he doesn't need all the other bells and whistles that they come with. He doesn't want to pay for it. He's like, no, I'm just going to vibe code this. You showed it to me and I was like blown away. I was like, this actually looks really cool. Like I'm thinking like, man, we could use something like this, you know? It's just so awesome what you can do quickly. Just be like, boom, let's get this thing up and running. Let's get this working. And the simpler it is, I think the quicker you can deploy it, right?
Absolutely. The other cool thing that HubSpot has done to enable things like that is they've introduced the MCP, right? The Model Context Protocol, which is essentially the language that AI can use to communicate with HubSpot and say, I need this type of thing, right? And what that does is it connects the AI to the SDK essentially and says like, okay, what do you want? What functionality do you need? And then communicate more efficiently. So rather than AI trying to read all of the HubSpot SDK docs, it's able to say, this is exactly what you need. And it kind of works together and in tandem to help you vibe code the crap out of this stuff and do whatever you can do in HubSpot. It's super powerful. And I think not enough partners are really utilizing that yet, particularly when you can spin up a developer account on HubSpot for free, right? And you can whip this stuff up so your prototype's not just like a website, but now suddenly it's actually interacting with data on a test account and things like that. I don't think enough partners are really taking advantage of this. Even if you don't have a developer, you can still be playing around with this, again, at zero cost.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I think that's a great place to end it. This has been another great episode of the HubSpot Hints podcast. We talked about vibe coding today, and we want to hear from and talk to more HubSpot partners that are coding up and building their own tools, because I think it is definitely setting those partners apart from everyone else. It's definitely worth looking into.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andy. Appreciate your time here.
Thanks, Mike. We'll see
See
you.
ya.